Hello, and welcome to the Tuning In podcast. I'm Dana Evans, your inner voice and emotional support coach. In this podcast, we explore the deep wisdom that lives in our bodies, emotions, and inner voice. Together, we'll shed the layers that no longer serve us, creating space to tap into the flow of life and experience true ease. So, are you ready to join me? Let's dive in. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Tuning In podcast. Today, we are continuing the emotional exploration series with a favorite topic, which is anger. So we are going to talk about what is anger, how does it express in the system, and what does it actually need from us. This is a series that I will be continuing as we talk about different emotions and different even sensations in the body, and we actually get to look at them from a quick and digestible standpoint in how we can support ourselves when we're experiencing this. So last week we talked about anxiety. This week we're talking about anger, and you can always check the show notes for any links that I mention or any further actions that you want to take, because part of the inspiration behind this series is the Emotions Decoded program, which is kicking off for now. It is kicking off live in October. And this is a 14-day program. It's an audio-based program that will be delivered as a private podcast feed, which, by the way, is going to be so exciting, so accessible, and so easy for you to operate and use and digest. You're going to get a private podcast feed when you sign up. And each day for 14 days, you will get a teaching and an embodiment practice. So you're going to learn a lot more about emotions. It is called Emotions Decoded, after all. We'll get to the root cause of anger, anxiety, and sadness, and actually learn how to process those emotions the moment they come up, so you're not stuck carrying around emotional baggage and you're not stuck cycling and thinking about why you're feeling this way. Instead, you can just release the emotion and carry on. It is so nice to not be taking emotional baggage throughout your day. Anyway, that is the inspiration behind this series, because I wanted to talk to you all on the podcast deeper about these emotions. But as I'm creating these episodes, I'm sure that this is going to be a regular visitor on the Tuning In podcast. And as different emotions come up to our audience, we will be talking about them in these micro deep dives. That's what they are. They're micro deep dives into an emotion. So for now, we are starting with anger, anxiety, and sadness, because those are some big core emotions that our society is riddled with, we as individuals are experiencing on a regular basis, and you are going to be able to know what to do with them. So that is the intention of this podcast. But of course, if you want to go deeper and actually learn how to take these lessons and how to take these insights from the podcast and turn them into practical, actionable things that you do every day to actually make a change in your life, then I invite you to join the Emotions Decoded program. And if you're not ready for that, then I trust and know that these emotional exploration episodes where we deep dive into an emotion will help you, and will definitely help you get clarity on this emotion, for you to understand how it's showing up in your system, whether overtly or unconsciously. And it will show you what to do with it and give you a different perspective, because that is my whole thing with this work, is that I really want to take the emotional experience and make it feel a little bit more accessible, a little less scary, and to invite comfort, maybe is the word, or maybe neutrality around different emotional experiences, so that your system doesn't seize up every time you feel something besides good or happy. That you can really ride the emotional wave, you can really experience and taste the rainbow of emotions without making it mean that something is wrong. So with that, let's dive into anger. So anger I'm sure each of you has an experience with anger that maybe sticks with you. So if you pause for a second and think, ooh, is there a memory? Is there a flash showing up when I ask myself, what is anger? Maybe it's an experience you had where someone had explosive anger towards you. Maybe it was a feeling that you had where you felt rage bubbling up inside, or you had anger directed outwards towards someone else. Notice what comes up in your system when I even talk about that. How do you respond? Does your body contract a little bit? Does it say, "Ooh, I don't want to think about that. I don't want to look at that"? That's the thing with anger is often this pent up energy that builds in the body. It can feel really fiery and loud and powerful. And it can also express that way. And what I think is really interesting about anger is that it's often this emotion that's directed outward. Like sadness, okay, we're not like projecting sadness so much onto other people. We're not making people sad. We're not like spitting our sadness onto other people. We're not spitting our anxiety onto other people in the same way. But with anger, I see this a lot. I've experienced this for sure in my own, is when there's anger inside me, I tend to project it out onto others. And I think that's really common. So there's this collective discomfort and even fear maybe around anger, because we don't want to explode and attack others with our anger. And yet that tends to be how anger is expressed. So it's powerful, it's fiery, it's loud, it's uncomfortable, and it can feel very scary because we know that anger tends to be this projectile outward expression that can often cause others to be at the effect of it. So we don't want to do that to other people. And so what do? When we feel the anger, we want to suppress it. We want to avoid it. We want to hide it because it doesn't feel safe. And so it is definitely the most taboo of emotions, of these three core emotions. And I think it's one that there's a lot of shame around, both internally. If you get angry, you might feel guilt internally. Or if someone else is angry, they get shamed for it. And especially as children, I know we're told to calm down. Don't be mad. Calm down. Let's get over this. Or at least that was the experience growing up that I saw a lot, is we didn't want to address anger. And then as adults, I both see and experience this, is that we're uncomfortable with other people's anger. And so when you think about it that way, if your partner or a friend or a parent is really angry, notice what that does to your system. So when someone else is angry, it can feel really uncomfortable for our system. So the natural tendency is to calm them down, is to quell their anger, is to really help them get over it, help them move through it, to coax them out of it, because we are uncomfortable. Isn't that interesting? Like with anger, we're so uncomfortable as a society with anger that if someone else is angry, the person who's not even necessarily on the receiving end of the anger, but who's just witnessing or hearing that someone is angry, they're wanting to get that person out of anger because they're also uncomfortable with it. So there's this whole collective discomfort with anger. So one other thing that is worth knowing in the what is it section of anger is it is often covering up other emotions like fear, sadness, and grief. And that's because sometimes it actually is easier to feel angry, to feel outraged, to feel wronged than to acknowledge the pain that's deeper within. And you'll hear this as we go into different emotions. A lot of emotions can be cover-ups for other emotions. It really depends on you and your system, what you're comfortable with, what you grew up with, how you express. So there's no one blanket for any of these emotions. Sometimes we're just purely angry, and that's great. And then sometimes it's covering up for something else. But you'll find that as we dive deeper into this series, you're like, wait, does anger cover for sadness? Does sadness cover for anger? Anxiety is covering anger, right? They're all interconnected, and it is because it's a case-by-case scenario and person-by-person scenario. But I think it's worth sharing because you can recognize that within yourself. Okay, part 2. How does anger express in the system? Feel this in your body. I always am going to ask that question. How do you know when there's anger in your system? What does that look like? What does that feel like? What's happening in your body? So, for example, I can tell you what I sense. It's like this fuming, simmering energy that's like just below the surface and it's just ready. It's like a pot, right? That's just about to boil over. That's what anger often feels like. It can show up as pettiness, bitterness, passive aggressiveness, and long-term anger that isn't addressed can show up as resentment. Everyone asks, what's the difference between anger and resentment? In my experience, anger is more present, resentment is lingering. It's been around for a long time. And that one can be a little more difficult to release because there's a lot insulating that resentment. It also can show up as a chip on your shoulder, which I associate with bitterness. If you just have this edge about you, especially if you're angry about a topic, you can have a chip on your shoulder about that topic. And it can show up as you being really hyper reactive to situations and getting absolutely furious when it might not be called for. For example, if someone cuts you off in traffic and you freak out, or if your partner didn't put the dishes away and you snap and yell at them, those are all signs that, oh, there's some anger in my system. So anytime that you're noticing that you're overreacting, that you're noticing that about yourself, not that someone else is maybe telling you, but you're like, oh man, I just got really mad at this situation, and you walk away and maybe you have a little shame because you're like, that was uncalled for. Why did I react so strongly? It's most likely because there's some pent up anger that needs to be released. And if you don't release it, it becomes like a pressure cooker. What happens is the pressure is building, right? There's that pressure building inside, and you feel the anger, but you're not letting it out. But it can't stay in the pressure cooker. Even a pressure cooker has the steam release. So what happens with anger in particular is you need to release some steam, right? Blow off some steam. And so what will happen is you'll snap, you'll get mad at something, you'll have these like micro reactions that might feel really out of the blue to someone else around you, but it's literally just trying to let off some steam, to let some of the anger out, because you can't hold all of that internally. And with that, you end up being really quippy and snappy and bitter and cranky all the time. But that's not you. That's just the anger expressing itself, trying to do the best it can to get out of your system so it doesn't develop into something worse, like an ulcer, like liver issues, like something else showing up in your body. It's just trying to express itself. So you're not a bitter person, but there's probably some built up anger and resentment within your body that, if addressed at the root level, will relieve you from all of those other symptoms of suppressed anger. So all of the little things that are happening, the bitterness, the snappiness, the quips, the frustration, the hyper reactivity to inconveniences, those are not you, and those aren't even fully the anger. The anger is deeper and bigger and stronger. But until you're willing and able to express and access that deep level of anger, you're going to think you're just this cranky person. But I promise you're not. You are not. It's just suppressed anger, okay? So let's not make that an identity, and let's recognize that it just wants to get out. It needs to get out of your system, and we don't want it to build up. Another thing physically that can feel with anger is your shoulders can feel really tight. They can be lifted up. A really strong way my body reacts to anger, and this is old, okay? So back from an old job that I used to work at, I was never really able to operate the way I wanted to, and there was a lot of anger and frustration I had about it. It wasn't really a safe or healthy place for me to express it, so I suppressed it, right? Emotion that's not expressed ends up getting suppressed. The way my body decided to deal with it at the time was to keep that energy in my shoulders and my traps. And you'll often find anger lingering there. to this day, even though I have done so much work with, I have this year in particular, I have done a lot of anger work. It's really powerful. It's really powerful. But when I start to feel that like a little bit angry, a little bit defensive, a little bit under attack, right? You can feel how all of those things, like an animal, like when they're feeling defensive, they're feeling under attack. What do? They like get their hackles up. They arch their back. Like my cat, her tail fluffs up, the back of her spine fluffs up. I literally feel that happening in my traps and my shoulders, and they tighten. And I don't always recognize it in the moment, but after an experience where I'm like, ooh, I was angry and I walk away, I can feel that tension in my body. So know that it's going to show up in your body in different ways. I talked about anger more in the liver episode where we talked all about the liver because our liver is in charge of processing emotion, and anger is a big one that ends up getting stuck in the liver. So I talk a little bit more about it there if you want to reference that episode. But those are all different ways they can show up in your body. And remember, I'm giving you things that I've seen and experienced that are more general, but always check in with your system and ask yourself, like, how do I know when I'm angry? What does that feel like? What does that look like? How do I know when my anger is about to bubble over? What are the signs and symptoms? Because we want to be able to get to know ourselves really well so that we don't end up projecting anger at people all the time, because that doesn't feel good for you. It doesn't feel good for them. And that's where we get into this place of anger needs to be quieted. And it takes us to our next topic, which is, what does this emotion need? What it doesn't need, believe it or not, is to be controlled and calmed down and silenced. Now, remember, I'm talking about healthy expressions of anger. The reason anger gets a bad rap is because the people who are really out of balance with their anger, whether you've seen it or experienced it or been it, that's that scary anger that we don't like. That's that explosive anger that can be aggressive, harsh, harmful anger. And so when we think about that, of course, we would say, yeah, they need to calm down and they need to be controlled. They need to control themselves. They need to control their anger. While I understand that from a safety perspective, when we're looking at a more healthy, balanced human who might have like little anger outbursts, recognize that your anger, what it actually needs is to be moved. And in fact, I would say that for the other type of person that I'm talking about is like, for the safety of others, yeah, they need to be able to control their anger so they're not exploding on people around them. We never want that. But their anger also needs to be moved. It doesn't need to be suppressed. The reason people are so angry is from suppressed anger. And it's this like really bad feedback loop of the anger comes out in the wrong and inappropriate and painful ways because they're not able to access it in a safe and healthy way, and probably because they're not able to access what else is underneath that emotion. So not to psychoanalyze people right now, but I think it's worth talking about because anger is such a hot and touchy and uncomfortable subject. And there's a really wide spectrum of how anger presents internally and externally. And so we always want to recognize and honor that within ourselves and within others. But overall, anger does not need to be controlled and calmed down. It actually needs to be moved, shaken, pushed out, and expressed. I like to express it in a physical way. I've found that anger is such a strong emotion in our systems that physical expression can be really good. And what that can look like, I love stomping, shaking, stomping on the floor and really pushing yourself to an edge to move it out. Moving your body, pushing against a wall, pushing weights. There's some really powerful ways that we can get the anger out, including squeezing and releasing. It's so interesting. When I was a child, I had a lot of access to anger. I had a lot of access to all of my emotions. But anger was one of them. And one of the things I would do is hold my breath and squeeze everything until I would shake. And of course, my parents were like, don't do that. What are you doing? But in reflection now, I actually think that my body knew that was a really healthy way to move anger, not necessarily holding my breath. That's, you can pass out from that, but doing that squeezing. So when I feel a lot of anger, if I can't do a full expression, I really like to squeeze until my muscles shake and then release. And what you're doing is you're getting that sensation of building and then the release that comes on the other side. It's really powerful. Just remembering and recognizing that healthy anger release and healthy anger expression looks a lot different and feels a lot different than unhealthy ones. What we are mostly exposed to and experience and feel and see is the unhealthy anger expression. That's why this one's a really big hurdle to get over, because the resistance is so strong in our bodies. I don't want to hurt people. I don't want to be like that. Whatever your vision of anger is, you're like, I don't want to be like that, so I can't be angry. When in fact, it is healthy to be angry. Angry is a momentous energy and emotion. Anger can cause movement. In fact, on the emotional scale, anger is above sadness, because sadness and in particular depression can feel stuck and stagnant. If someone's been really sad and depressed for a long time, we want to get them to anger, which seems counterintuitive, but getting someone to anger is actually getting them into momentum and movement, and there's some fire there. There's some action behind anger. Anger is a really good indicator. There's a feeling of injustice, of wrong, and I need to speak, and anger can signal to us like, oh, something needs to be said, and we can process that, and we can speak with conviction and clarity and confidence and a strong voice against or for whatever it is we're experiencing. But when we speak in the angry, bitter, sharp voice, it doesn't have the same effect. So having the anger to show you, ooh, there's some injustice here, there's something else going on, to process that in the body, then to speak from that strong, clear place. Like, processing anger doesn't mean you're no longer angry or you no longer feel the injustice. It means that you process that surface part of it. You've moved through and you're at the deeper clarity that's underneath it. And that's a really positive place to take action from and to speak from and to move from. There's a lot of insight in anger. There's a lot of clarity that can come through anger. You think of it as like fire. It can burn down, but in that burning, it can also be like a kiln. It can sharpen our senses. It can burn off the debris and give us clarity on the other side. And that's the superpower of anger. Take this time, reflect on what it is, and if it's a different perspective than you had. Again, these are all designed to give you a new perspective than what we're typically exposed to. And then notice for yourself, how does it express in my system? Do I have unprocessed anger? What does it need from me? Start to play with some of the things that I addressed here. Recognize that it doesn't have to stay stuck. You're not a bitter, cranky person, and there is another way. So with that, thank you as always for listening. I love this emotional exploration series. I trust that it gave you what you needed. And again, I would love to have you in the Emotions Decoded program. We are starting mid-October. All of the information is in the show notes. I'm going to be sending out invitations and more information in the coming weeks. So stay tuned. Get on the Vitamin D newsletter if you want to learn more. If you really want to take it further and implement this into strategies and practices and daily emotional hygiene that keeps these things from building up and being explosive in the first place, then I welcome you into the Emotions Decoded program. We're going to have so much fun. I'm here to make emotions feel lighter, more accessible, less scary, less intense, and we're going to do it together. And I promise you that by the end of this experience, you will feel lighter, you will feel more clear about your emotions, and you will have your go-to processes and practices anytime you feel the emotion bubbling up. Instead of suppressing it and avoiding it and ignoring it and writing it off and questioning why it's even there, you'll have the tools to actually move through it. And that's what we want. So you're no longer being led by your emotional baggage because you have the tools to move through it, to release it, to free yourself from it, and to come back to the calm clarity that lives on the other side of the emotional charge. And then emotions don't feel so scary. Let's let them be part of our experience and let the emotional hygiene, which is the Emotions Decoded program, it's our flossing, right? We're just taking care of our gums every day. Then the dentist doesn't feel as scary, right? Your emotions don't have to feel as scary because you're going to start this practice of moving them every day in small bite-sized practices. And then you're going to be a pro at it. And it's going to be natural and easy, which is what we are designed to do. Our bodies are here to process emotion. Let's let them do their job. So as always, thank you for tuning in, and I'll catch you next week where we're going to talk about sadness. See you then. Thank you for joining me in another episode of the Tuning In podcast. If you loved this episode, please rate and review it or share it with a friend. If you want to go deeper into the realm of emotions and learn the language of your body, check out my audio course, Emotions Decoded, at alignful.com/audio. As always, you can follow along with my journey on Instagram at Dana_Evans. See you next week.